Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. It's nice to see everyone here. As always, a privilege to share the platform with each and every one of you here. It is nice to see some faces and some new ones as well. This afternoon, afternoon by my time, I must say, we're gonna have our first webinar in the series of many to come. And we do have one of our own joining us to share a couple of, excerpts and things that he's actually doing in relation to what I call a very interesting but, germane issue in relation to terrorism and counter-terrorism in Ghana context. So perhaps just to give a bit of background and context, in the last couple of years, what has happened is that when you look at the West African sub-region, we've seen a host of these terrorist groups or militant groups, as some would call them. So we've seen Boko Haram, we've seen Islamic State, we've seen Al-Qaeda, all of them attempt to sort of set up base or and gain operational scope and influence in most of Sahelian West Africa, and even now trying to move further down south to some of the coastal communities. In that same respect, we've also seen a number of local and international actors try to prevent or put in place certain counter-terrorist activities to prevent or forestall the rise of these groups and them gaining a foothold in a number of these countries. But as some of us may know, these actions or the actions of a number of these local and international actors have not always had the intended effect that we would expect. So in this webinar or this afternoon, we have one of our own by name of Dr. Sulley Ibrahim to share some insights with us as to what is happening within the wider region, but particularly in the context of Ghana, how the Ghana's resilience to terrorism broadly is, and what sort of lessons we can learn going forward to deploy that. So let me give you a bit of background about Sulley, and then I'll hand over to him to take us through for the next 30 or 40 minutes, and would have an open floor. Sulley, Dr. Sulley Ibrahim, he's a fellow at the Abuja-based Centre for Democracy and Development, CDD West Africa. He also previously worked as head of programs, and then later the acting chief director for the Accra-based Africa Centre for Security and Counter-Terrorism. He has a PhD in social sciences from Catholic University, KU Leuven in Belgium, and he also has an MA in conflict resolution from the University of Bradford in the UK, and has a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology in Information Studies from the University of Ghana, Legon. Sulley's research interest really is at the intersection of peace, conflict, and security studies, and he is currently researching on the state of governance of non-state armed violence, peace building in protracted chieftaincy conflicts, and the securitization of the COVID pandemic and related issues in West Africa. So it is nice to have everyone. And Sulley, we are privileged to have you join us this afternoon. I would want to hand over the proceedings to you. I'll stop sharing my screen, and you can share yours and take us through basically what you have for the next maybe 30, 40 minutes, and then we just have an open house and have the conversation going for it. So over to you, Sulley.
Thank you, Doc, and thank you for everyone. Good afternoon to you. from here in Accra. And as Doc introduced, briefly, this is a work in progress. And then I want us to, all of us, be like, it's a discussion one instead of, like it's a final document. So I put out there that we all read and all share and do the discussion. So basically, I will start with, like you said, that my introduction, and then the presentation outline. I will do introduction. I will share a brief on the literature that I've reviewed concerning this kind of problems within our sub-region. And I also go through my conceptual notes and framework that I'm used for the analysis. And then I'll go to my methodology, discuss findings, or bring out the findings I got briefly, that's ongoing findings, and also we discuss and get conclusion and some reflection and takeaway. So let me start right away.
So before you go on, so are you able to make your slides bigger? So if you
okay,
use the slides to show function, yes, brilliant.
this way. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
thank you.
thank you. Yeah. So the objective of this project, in a broader context, as Doc introduced earlier, if you look at the proliferation of terror groups within the West African sub-region, especially since the after 9/11 attacks, and then the region became part of the global war on terror in 2002 thereabout. We've seen a number of groups emerging once in a while in other areas or close to Ghana per se, and cause a lot of havoc. The objective of this study was to find out why is it that other parts of the region, of the West African sub-region are more or less prone or vulnerable to the emergence of these groups and the attacks, whether cross-border attacks or other attacks in the name of other groups that operates outside of the region. So in doing that, because we have, if you look at Boko Haram in Nigeria, it's not every part of Nigeria that they attack. If you look at other groups in the Sahel, not every part in that they attack. So there are pockets of resilience, even at where terrorism is very active. And more so Ghana, for example, we are a little bit more or less a privilege for all this year to have been resilient against this kind of crisis facing the region. So these are the motivation, and I decided to do the work on it. And so more like I said, profession of the groups, I also mentioned the number of deadly groups in the sub-region and where they are particularly operating. If you look at Boko Haram, generally in the northern Nigeria, but also recently doing cross-border attacks and diffuse violence in somewhere in the Chad and also Cameroon. And if you look at the reasons, if you do the reading of the reason, you get to realize that most often it's context dependent. Most of the reasons are nationally ingrained. They are found the grievances in those countries and where those groups are emerging and being active. If you look at Boko Haram, for example, issue of Islamic activism have predated the modern Nigerian state. So in the north where Boko Haram actually came from, we have those kind of activism that existed even before colonialism and during colonialism, and also amplified by the modern nation states, especially when those groups began to project the ideas towards the modern nation state, and they look at the confrontation, the response of the state somehow sometimes contribute to amplifying them. And also we look at the Sahelian groups, most of them emerged after the collapse of the Libyan state following the 2010-2011 Arab Spring. And that's precisely because the collapse of the Libyan state made weapons so available to other groups, especially the Tuareg group in the northern part that have been agitating for independence from Mali for so long. So the reading will tell you that they had opportunity to these weapons and they intended using it to escalate or speed their quest for independence. And in the process, it invited the Malian state to come and intervene, but the military went in ill prepared and they were defeated. And that shock more or seemed to be demoralizing for the military, and the junior officers took advantage of that to stage the coup in 2012, and that had degenerated to the situation where Mali is today. So those groups, they have committed violence within the country and also across the other region. But the analysis of the resilience, as I said earlier, is quite not sufficient in our literature, because most of the focus is on the groups that are operating, and the projection as if every part of the sub-region is affected by this kind of canker. So we begin to look at the resilience in other areas and see what we can do to contribute to containing these terrible groups. And the lack of analysis of the resilience of terrorist groups also seem to suggest that the counter-terrorism framework that we have today are informed by experiences of those who are undergoing terrorism or have been influenced or been attacked. So more like the experience are not necessarily informed by those who have been resilient, but those who have succumbed or have been vulnerable to terrorist groups. And that's a problem. So I decided to use Ghana as case study to do this analysis, because you look at Ghana, it's not only that Ghana have been resilient against proliferation of terror groups within its own territorial borders, but the fact that it has been able to contain or resist spillover attacks from neighboring countries, because Ghana is closer to Burkina Faso, and Burkina Faso is terrible under these groups' attacks. And Ghana is closer to Togo. Togo recently experienced some of these incursions. Cote d'Ivoire recently experienced some of them. And we look at our security arrangement. How do you see the security actors or the institutions showing signs to say, okay, they have been weak in countering this kind of violent activities, and for that matter, the state is not strong enough to deal with them. So what is at all that is unique about Ghana, and be able to more or less contain these groups out of our national borders, and also ensure that there are no proliferation of other groups within the country. So this is the motivation, and I sought to do. So in that, reading the literature further, if you look at, because my focus was on the cultural explanation, why they more or less emerge or spread their violence across, why are they effective in certain areas and they are not effective in other areas? So what are the motivations? So in terms of looking at that, the first thing that comes up in the literature, you get to know issues of bad political leadership and governance. Most of the argument will say when states begin to repress specific groups or repress certain dissent from certain groups that are linked with the ideology or some identity differences, you begin to see this kind of sense of extremism or intolerance emerging in the community. So state repression is a key marker of the extent to which certain groups that were not necessarily violent begin to pick violence at their mode of operation. And once that kind of builds up, and it becomes difficult for the state to manage, so it becomes wider. So one thing is bad political leadership, and then state, especially state repression and intimidation of individuals identifying with certain groups or certain grievances that the state is unable to deal with. So we have problem with that. So when that becomes so widespread, you see the community begin to build their own resilience in the forms of having self-defense brigades or identity-based vigilante groups that are protecting particular communities. And once they build those groups up, those groups are also exploited by other individuals who have who make capital or more like make profit out of violence, or more or less think that those violence will facilitate their cause, and they begin to amplify the groups away from being a vigilante then to a violent or extreme group. So we have that kind of narrative there. And the optimal counterterrorism measure that emerges in this kind of analysis is to ensure that there's inclusive governance, issues of institution building, like ensuring that delivery from the state to the society is effective enough and is inclusive for everybody. Those arguments have been advanced there. The second argument about the cause is also related, is embedding the socioeconomic conditions. West Africa have been projected as an extremely more like unequal place. How do we see social welfare policies for individuals that are trying to catch up with the state or that are trying to catch up in society? So you have issues of youth poverty, compelling a lot of people or other young people to take into arms or other activities that are not favorable to their community, their country, or more or less undermining the legitimacy of the state, because the state itself is not seen to manifest in their lives. So sometimes they don't even recognize the state, and that's a problem. So the optimal counter-terrorism that have been suggested is, okay, we can moderate this instance by reducing disparities and deepening respect for differences in society, more like building community resilience to hold one another. So, okay, there are problems, but should we kill others because we are facing those problems? Or should other groups or identity-based individuals be seen as the reason why others are poor? So those arguments have been advanced, been more like being pronounced in the literature there. But then the third one, which is quite difficult to deal with, is the issue of supreme value, that there are certain groups that have certain values to the extent that even if you put them into, you give the entire government to them, or you lift them to the level of the most expensive or the most well-endowed persons in society, as long as that ideology that they ascribe to is not part of what you are doing for them, there's no way that they will stop the value, they can recognize the state as legitimate. So those groups seek to displace the current state and in the process install their own state. So irrespective of whether improve governance or improve socioeconomic development, it doesn't make any sense to those groups. So the best measure that has been suggested, or the optimal measure, is, so okay, how do we deal with this kind of group? So others have suggested about defeating the active terrorists, those who embark on violence, defeating them using military means, and then prosecuting their supporters using the criminal justice system, and at the same time improving the sense of nationality over sectional identity among citizens. So more like go back to the state. How can the state ensure that people recognize or identify with it more than the identity groups or the sub-identity groups within their society, or where they more whole primary membership? How do you ensure that the state, as the bigger body or umbrella, hold more supremacy compared to the values of the identity group? So those are the suggestions there. So, but the critical issue, once again, so okay, terrorism is very much context dependent. So for it to manifest, then there have to be certain opportunities, and those opportunities exist, have to come and meet with certain motivation. For example, there have to be grievance. You can't just get up one day and say you're forming a terrorist group to go and attack state when you have not been agreed, or there have not been certain grievances that you think the groups think that, okay, they have not resolved. And even if those grievances are there, then they have to be certain motivation to carry it through. Because for any action to take place, one need the motivation. The motivation could be an ideology, could be family members are already in there. It could be financial rewards, okay, commit violence in exchange for money or whatever. And all that have to come with capacity. You can't have an opportunity, you can have opportunity and motivation, but if you don't have the capacity to embark on violence, if the state is so strong and so present in society, there's no way that individuals feeling aggrieved, have the motivation to do the wrong, will have the capacity to do it in the presence of a state that is so strong and effective in their presence. So those are the arguments advanced there. So, and then
before you proceed, could you just speak up a little bit so that, because some people say they're not hearing you too clearly.
Oh, okay. Thanks so much, yeah. So continue from where the previous about the literature review and the issues or the broader discussions within there, then I begin to think about terrorism, or we look at terrorism, how is it defined? And that would then guide me into my analysis of what I thought I take as terrorism, what I thought do I take as signals that are more or less I coin as, or more or less in a literature, costly signal, in the sense that they have to be motivation, they have to be opportunity, motivation, and then the capacity. So those things have to be there. So if you look at the literature once again, the definition of terrorism basically started with it as a crime, and a violent one, of course. It's not just like other crimes like armed robbery or homicide or all those things. It has its own peculiar characteristics. And one way to do is only more like to coerce, to intimidate, to kill, or compel certain favorable action towards those who are committing that crime. So you see other people, certain groups will go and kidnap so many girls from certain school and then negotiate for ransom. They want the one who paying they want the ransom, more like it's something that is favorable to their terms. So there should be something linking them to the what their violence are targeted. So more like terror groups are rational. That's some of the arguments that have been advanced. They just don't go and attack certain places because they are limited with resources, and they make good use of their resources in making sure that they don't miss on target and look bad in the eyes of the society, or weak in the eyes of their colleagues, or okay, these groups here are not strong enough. So whatever group that emerges, whatever violence that they use, whatever target that they target to kill or coerce or intimidate, are all based on their own rational calculation that will be successful and it will bring certain rewards to them. So following from that, okay, the cautionary signal will also tell you that it's about tendencies in society, in a state, or among a group of people that will make them attractive for attractive terrorist groups or prohibitive to terrorist groups. For if the state is so strong and effective, it will be difficult for some groups to emerge and begin to visit violence on others and be successful in it. But if that is a prohibitive state. But if the state is so weak, it becomes attractive because they can overwrite it, or the individuals inside community are so divided, then they give room or spaces to terror groups to stand and commit their acts. But if they are so integrated, so respectful of each other's differences, then it becomes difficult for bad actors to emerge in their mess and commit this kind of crime. So that could be that. So if you look at the causal signal agreement, it's going to be either low or high. Opportunities cannot be like a uniform. It's either there are more opportunities or there are fewer opportunities. There are high motivation or lower motivation. There are high capacity to do it or no low capacity to do it. So there's no way you can say, okay, there's a society that's total, that has none of these features that are useful to attract bad actors, or a society that is wholly attractive to terrorist groups. So we have that kind of imbalances in our society and across the world that can attract or prohibit the proliferation of terror groups, and also cross-border attacks and diffuse violence that are committed by other nationals or non-nationals in solidarity with or in solidarity of other groups that exist even outside of their own countries. So that's the causal signal argument. But if you come to how do we counter this kind of, how do we ensure that the prohibitive part of the causal signal is strong enough to deter terrorist groups from emerging and being effective, or to deter other groups from crossing what they have emerged to other countries to commit crime. So we're looking about, if you look at the counter-terrorism argument or the literature, there are other discussion that those who will favor the military means, but there are much of the greater discussion in recent times is shifting towards a combination of military and non-military measures. Because the conditions that bring terror groups out can be addressed using the non-military means. But once they become active, then become difficult. You see other government will try to use the military means to ensure that people don't join them. But the non-military means more or less addressing the problem that bring them into existence. So if the problems are not there, if the motivations are not there, no opportunity, no capacity, or low motivation, low capacity, and then low opportunity in society, you won't have them emerge, and even if they have emerged, you don't have support for them, and they will not be effective in society. So the arguments for the military means and then the non-military means to prevent the groups from proliferation of groups in your community in the first place, to preempt the grievances that will lead to the emergence of these groups, and also protect your borders or protect your country against in case others have emerged outside, and also respond to acts that have occurred. In that case, if you're not able to prevent, you're not able to protect, and you're not able to preempt it, and it finally results in violence, you have to respond, you have to deal with it. So those are the arguments within the counter-terrorism. But if you look at, okay, what are terrorist organizations or terrorist groups? Is it anybody that is, any group at all that is embarking on violence can be described as terrorist groups? There are international laws and there are national laws that designate certain groups as terrorist organizations. And if you look at UN resolution, a lot of them have been described as terrorist groups. And if you look at West Africa's sub-region, you have Boko Haram in Nigeria, you have Al-Shabaab in, also if you go to the Eastern African area, you have Al-Shabaab in Somalia. And if you go to outside of the continent, you talk about Islamic State in Syria and also in Iraq, and you look at Al-Qaeda also in the Arabian Peninsula, which these two Islamic State, ICAR also have affiliates in our sub-region, especially in the Sahelian countries. Okay, so the next one is to frame this one into my analysis. How do we then analyze what is cultural signal in the context of Ghana and what is counterterrorism in the context of Ghana? So I look at, okay, community resilience. If the community people are resilient enough not to create spaces for bad actors to emerge, then it will be difficult for anybody to even think of using the identity or using religion or using culture or ethnic or whatever is the basis to argue for or to address certain grievances. So we look at how can we measure community resilience? We look at areas of shared relationships. We have issues about naming ceremonies. We have marriages. Do people cross into other neighborhoods or do they have friendship across other identity groups as a religion, ethnic, or whatever is defining character? Do they have that kind of cross relationships where naming ceremonies are shared, marriages are shared, funerals are shared, and festivals and all those things are shared, marketplaces? There is that kind of willingness to trust one another, to cooperate, and willingness to respect others as fellow citizens, irrespective of the identity differences. So that's one mind framing. And the other framing I'm looking at within to ensure that whether there are opportunities for it or no opportunities for it, or motivation or no capacity, is to look at the statecrafts. Is the state itself party to these kind of problems? If the state is unifying, it has the high possibility of preventing or prohibiting the proliferation of identity-based groups, and for that matter, individuals who will capitalize on state action towards certain groups to mobilize extremism or mobilize intolerance against other individuals in society or even the state itself. And then that would descend down to strong attachment to the state. If people feel strongly attached or identify with the state, would that affect the extent to which they identify or associate more with their own groups or identity groups compared to the state? So that's a debate that, because if you look at the political science literature, you look at the nation building literature, you come to that kind of strong identification with the nation state or the national state or whatever has the potential to reduce attachment to sectional or sectional ideologies or sectional identities. So that can also be a prohibitive factor. And the state delivery and its relationship with society, relationship with the people, is a state repressive state or not non-repressive state? If it represses people so much, definitely then you are distancing the citizens from identifying with the state. And for that matter, you are weakening their national identity and you are amplifying their relationship with their identity groups and reducing the legitimacy of the state in their presence. And then we're also looking about coming to the counter-terrorism strategy. We will look at a strategy that is nationally ingrained in the sense that it's featured in the core of the country, and the core of every country is its constitution. So if you have a national counter-terrorism strategy or a framework that is different or not in line with what the constitution stands for. If constitution uphold basic human rights and you have a counter-terrorism strategy that gives a wholesome leeway to operatives of that strategy to kill or whatever people who emerge in the sense of fighting for identity, and instead of you have the capacity to arrest them, but you decide to say, okay, label them all of a sudden as terrorist groups, and then you kill them instantly without passing them through the judicial process. Would that amount to reinforcing the constitution or amount to more or less undermining the constitution? So the fundamental aspect of a counterterrorism strategy is to look at its relationship with the constitution that gives rise to every law that comes from it. And I'm looking at this, and also if you look at the national constitution, you also have to look at other laws or other acts that have been passed by parliament or other judicial pronouncement relating to crimes or activities that have relationship to terrorism. And if you look at key act in Ghana here is the Anti-Terrorism Act 762 which was enacted in 2008. It has undergone a lot of reforms, but it also has its own problem. But I think finally we can discuss that. But and the second one will have to do with whether there is institutional leadership for the framework in the first place. That leadership will have to provided by the state, but then does it include other aligned actors? And also, does it take into account other forces within society that do not necessarily identify with the state, but they have influence on the in the broader scale of things within their community? Let's say chiefs, the offices of chiefs, the offices of religious leaders, and offices of other community leaders that they can be given certain responsibility or can be contacted or be involved in identify what are their concerns of certain groups that are likely to motivate intolerance or extremism. So you look at that. So the core components of every counterterrorism is to prevent, I mentioned that previously, to prevent and to preempt the proliferation of domestic groups, and also to deter or protect against attacks that are not coming from outside or even inside. You don't want them, if you are not successful to prevent them from emerging in the first place and they have emerged, then you have to ensure you protect the other community members or other groups from this attack that will come from them. Also to respond and treat threats and actual incidents that come from there. So basically I call it as 3P S plus R. So 3P incident means prevent, another P preempt, and the other one to protect, but R means to respond. So then I design, okay, this is my methodology. As I said earlier, this is ongoing research and it's purely qualitative. And it's a bigger project, and we examine the extent to which Ghana resilient to terrorism is due to possible signal of terror groups or strength of counter-terrorism, in the sense that, is it that terrorist groups that have chosen not to attack us? And if they have chosen not to attack, what are the reasons? Or is it because our strength, our counter-terrorism is strong enough to deter the emergence and also, for that matter, attacks that may come from outside? But this paper in itself is basically based on evaluative literature review, why there is proliferation of terror groups and counterterrorism within the sub-region. So I have already discussed that. And then also archival analysis in the documents from other scholar publication. And the focus is on resilience of society. So you take from historic how the state was made and all that, and you look at groups that have related in the nation state long before it was put together as a nation state, and after the nation state, what are the things going on? And also content analysis of the counterterrorism strategy or framework of Ghana. And the extraction of the data was manually done, but then guided by the conceptual notes and the framework as I presented in the previous pages. So now my findings: opportunities that are attractive or prohibitive enough for proliferation of terror groups in Ghana. If you look at community resilience, you come to realize that Ghana as a nation state, since becoming independent, we haven't had that kind of situation where there are strong sectional ideologies contesting the power and the authority of the unified nation state. That has been a key feature. We have not had instances where there are groups that have projected so much power to the extent that the state have to deploy violence to control them, as the case of Boko Haram in the northern Nigeria, the foundation of Boko Haram in the northern Nigeria, or the foundation of ISIS groups in the Sahel area, because more like the Tuareg group has been so resistant up there until the collapse, or even before the collapse of the Libyan state, and the Libyan state facilitated that. If you look at northern Nigeria, there have been strong Islamic activism long before Nigeria was put together as a nation state. And also as a nation state, these things have come up. Even before Boko Haram became Boko Haram in the year 2009, there were issues of Sharia arguments in the northern Nigeria section, whereby Zamfara, for example, gained the opportunity to practice Sharia, and that also caused more like activated other areas that Muslims are dominated to also want to practice Sharia. And one of those states are Borno and Yobo, the original places of Boko Haram. So those are Ghana, we haven't had that kind of challenge since independence. So we don't have, there is non-proliferation of sectional difference in ideology at the state level. And there's also strong cross-group interaction and shared ceremonies, and a lot of literature have pointed to this, that even you have, if you are using the Islamic religious identity, we have Christians and Muslims intermarrying or meeting one another at the funeral of a family member or community member, or even at the festivals of the chiefs. You have chiefs who are traditional, and at the same time, they are religious in terms of Islam or Christianity. So they bring all their groups together using their traditional mechanism. There are other parts of the world or other parts of the region that do not have this kind of opportunity. So Ghana have that kind of relationship and build the cohesion within the community. Traditional structures holding the religious structures together, or religious structures holding themselves together. And then we look at the post-independent statecrafts of the country. If you look at the 1992 Constitution, 1969, 79, and 1992 Constitution, all declare Ghana as a unitary state. Unlike the Constitution that gave birth to Ghana as independent, the Constitution of the colonial state, more or less, had Ghana organized into 4 territories. And virtually all these territories were a little bit independent of the other, and chiefs and other groups were given so much voice and sort of independence within that community. And that was what many analysts have pointed to, the fact that if Ghana had continued on that path, we didn't know which identity groups grievances will be activated from which region and taken to the stage, taken to the state itself, and what will be the threat facing the state from at that level. So those are the arguments that people say, okay, these are the things that are keeping Ghana together. But the other fundamental thing that Ghana did immediately after independence, and it has continued, is to prohibit political formation along ethnic, regional, and religious lines. Because doing so kept identity-based grievances from being actively activated at the state level. So you cannot go to the state level to more or less to argue for one particular identity-based group. Make that argument so strong that, oh, okay, they all form a party along that ethnic group and make that argument at the state level. Once we don't have that kind of activation at the broader or the national level, it also contributes to reducing the effectiveness of these differences at the societal level. That does not mean that individuals will not make or do not make choices using those differences as a basis. People may choose to marry based on the ethnic differences, religious differences, but the extent to which that they'll be activated at the state level or the society, the societal level and cause problem is quite minimal. So, and also I've mentioned earlier the terms of relation between the state, that the state have not targeted, we have not had any particular history or a prevailing case where the state have mounted huge violence against any identity-based group. And that could have also compelled many others within that group. So, okay, the state, those who are using the state to attack us, they are attacking us because of our ethnic identity, religious identity, or regional identity, which is different from those who are manning the state. We haven't had that kind of threat, so we are a little bit quite fortunate on that. So discussions have been talked about, because if you look at it in comparison with other cases around the sub-region, these are some of the key triggers. When the state becomes repressive, the possibility that it will trigger this kind of extremism is pointed out quite strongly. And also issues about national identification and attachment. Yes, it's much stronger in Ghana, and even I would say it's stronger across board, but we have problems when it comes to marginalized groups and groups at the border towns. If you look at and their problem, also I will come later to talk about it in other subsequent slides. So in a broader sense, in terms of opportunities or motivation or capacity to embark or form a terrorist groups in this country, if you look at the broader picture, you will say the chances are slim that this will happen. Because if you look at the factors, there are the motivation or the opportunities or the capacity to do it within the society to form and operate a terrorist group within Ghana you will say the chances are slim for any individual to want to engage that. That does not mean that as long as terrorism is a human activity, there is no way any human being will want to attempt. And that's what I move to the next slide. Say, so the next slide. So I said there are still conditions that could drive cross-border and diffuse violence or attacks. Cross-border.
Sulley, if you could probably try and quicken it a little bit in the next 5-8 minutes, okay. So we have ample time for the Q&A.
Okay,
Thank
I'll
you.
do that quickly. Yes. So I talk about weak sense of national recognition at the border towns, and then the minority groups, about marginalized groups like Fulani, the second generation citizens. They don't, when you look at the literature or few interaction with them, will tell you that yes, they feel they are Ghanaians, but they think that they are not recognized as much as they should be recognized as such. So that's a problem. And if you look at pointers have been made to Ghana foreign policy, the issue of a quasi-military US base or deals with Ghana, issues of Ghana hosting international conference on terrorism and Ghana joining other countries in the fight against terrorism, especially the group that are within our border or outside our border. And we look at the ethnic violence and chieftaincy conflict in the north, which is close to Burkina and Mali, and then you look at issues about the separatism problem in the eastward region of Ghana and its provenance to Burkina Faso and also Nigeria. Pointers have been made there. And then you look at the global picture where Ghanaians have participated. We have 5 Ghanaians who were recruited into ASIS in 2015. One was killed in Syria in 2015. And 2021, there's another one detonating suicide bomb in Mali. And the fact that our counter-terrorism strategy or law, for example, today, recognize that, okay, if the person dies in the name of international terrorism, he's a Ghanaian citizen, he has to be tried. But we haven't had the instances, we haven't had a case where the state have mounted a trial or prosecution against individuals of Ghanaians who have gone out to do that. So that's an issue people have faced. But if you come to the counter-terrorism strategy, I would say that I'm yet to come across any idea or any group the state had designated as a terrorist group in Ghana. So we don't have that phenomenon yet. But if you look at the strategy, we say it's well distributed. It's informed by the 1992 Constitution, but there are other challenges to it because it has 7 to 25 years imprisonment for terrorist groups and also their supporters. But also the definition of terrorism itself is also problematic. That act performed in furtherance of political, ideological, religious, racial, or ethnic cause, which is more like contrary to UN claim that any acts of terrorism are criminal and unjustified, regardless of whenever, and whoever committed. And if you look at other arguments, even looking at the amendment in 2012, 2014, others still described as evasive, vulnerable to procedural abuses, and also need firm up. An institution is led by the national security outfit, and the police, immigration, the judiciary are party to it. And then you look at policy statement like national security strategic plan, you have it in the core place the 3 Ps plus R that I talk about: to prevent the proliferation, to preempt intolerance extreme, to protect against actual attacks, and also to respond to attacks and deal with them. But if you look at its pro-state, so there's little bit inclusion of soft power resources, i.e. offices of the chiefs, the community level, more like the factor that ensure that groups do not emerge in the first place. There's a little bit, the inclusion of that one requires a little bit, requires that we have to and that also implies that the notion, the foundation of Ghana terrorism more like reflects ECOWAS, AU, and UN Security Council norm. And for that matter, the unique experience of Ghana is lacking, and if it's even there, then you have to be amplified. So then let me quickly so that we can get to that. So my discussion is comparing the two or looking at which one is the reason why we are a little bit resilient. So you said there are low opportunity and motivation. So the prohibitive factors are high already. So you can attribute that one, okay, to costless signal in the sense that the motivation to do it in the first place, if it's not there, then what motivation is not strong, opportunities are not there, and the capacity to do is not there. So more like we are a bit exceptional to the case of Boko Haram, and the state has not targeted in other ethnic groups, and its unified power is being effective. But the issues that I mentioned earlier, so these issues are things that we think we can deal with them because they are still being attractive and they can invite cross-border or diffuse violence. And then the fact that no terror acts has been committed in Ghana, despite this kind of threats that or challenges that are already in the system, you might say, okay, our counter-terrorism strategy is stronger because they are deterred diffuse violence and cross-border violence, but it also has this problem. As I even mentioned, the issue of dead fighters, because if you say the person dies, you have to be, once it's a Ghanaian citizen, you have to be investigated and prosecuted. And you have cases of 2 Ghanaians being involved with transnational terrorism. We have not had specific discussion on this matter, whether prosecution or investigation, and we are not able to know whether they have support basis here or not. So that's also another issue. But you can understand the reason why this become a challenge if you look at the future status and policy relevant. But before then, I said the battle against terrorism is one from heart and minds of the nation. If people hearts and minds are already inhospitable to it, then opportunity, motivation, and capacity proliferation of terrorist groups domestically might be prohibitive. So it might not be in the first place. And the counter-terrorism strategy, effective one, the one that combines the power of the state, i.e. the security establishment, and the inclusive power of our soft power resources, i.e. the non-military dimension, which should more or less have to do with our culture, have to do with our identity relationships. So those two are my key observation there. And in terms of future status and policy relevance, I'm looking at a discussion in terms of how to deal with dead fighters. That's very important, because if you're not able to deal with, to do their discussion or build their case, how do we know what motivated them to go out and join them and fight and die in that process? And whether they have members here or they have members, whatever, who linked up with them. So we need to also look at that one as a country. But how can we do that without provoking the opportunities in the first place, without creating opportunity for people to amplify that narrative? That's also a challenge. And the effective one is how to mix military and non-military counter-terrorism measures in a country that's not already experiencing terrorism. How do we do that mix? So that's also a discussion I think we can generate more, or policy relevance, the policymakers can also think around it. And how to, and my last point, which is very, very important, or quite dear, is the feelings of national recognition among communities and groups prone to extremism and the terrorist groups exploitation. The border town areas, their sense of national recognition, we as a country, we need to work on that. Not that they are saying they are not Ghanaians or they don't feel as Ghanaians, but the fact that they also think that sometimes Ghana is not recognized them as much as they are feeling as Ghanaians. And that's a problem, because then do create a lot of problems for their integration or their or non-recognition or legitimacy of the Ghana or the state of Ghana. So basically, that's my presentation. And thank you so much and appreciation for your questions, concerns, discussions, and then suggestions.
All right, thank you very much, Sulley. I think that was a wonderful one. So perhaps we can, use our little reaction button for a quick applause or shout or wave, whatever you want to do. I think, yes, that was a fantastic presentation on the state of terrorism more broadly in West Africa, but of course narrowing that down to Ghana in this instance. And I like the kind of theoretical dimensions that you actually brought into the discussion. Your three-piece argument, and then a bit about state repression, and you talk of opportunity, motivation, and capacity as all being significant factors in whether a country is able to counter the effect of any of these groups rising or not. I think, yes, the delivery is fantastic, but I already see a lot of hands up and a lot of questions also that have been typed in the box. So we have another 40 minutes to go. So hopefully we'll get to go into a lot of the details around that. But let me perhaps just kick it off with one of the questions that has come in, but one which I also have as well. I mean, in the last few years, we've seen you talk of these border towns and the issue of some of the groups like the Fulanis and others feeling sometimes being marginalized and not being part of the broader state, architecture. And then we also seen the issue of like climate change driving some of the pastoralist activities that they used to undertake, moving a bit more further down south. So the question really that somebody has actually, I suppose, asked here is, what is your view? To what extent would we see, if any, these groups that feel are not part of the state, right, increasingly begin to take up arms or fight certain causes that hitherto wouldn't have been the case? That's the first question, and I will come to a couple of other ones.
Okay. Thanks so much. And it's really a great question, because if you look at the literature and you look at the recent trend, you see so much involvement of the Fulani ethnic groups in terrorism issues or extremism issues around the sub-region. And that's really threatening for Ghana, especially in those areas where we have them, and but then people begin not to want to recognize their city, especially the second generation. That's a really thing. The climate change issue is also a threat, because they are no longer having access to their movement patterns, and that's a problem. So I totally agree with that, and that's a challenge that I pose, that we have to be effective in the way that we deal with, or in policies that amplify their sense of non-recognition in Ghana, especially those groups areas and the border towns. Because if the person feels not recognized, as others have argued elsewhere, they don't know, the second generation particular does not know where they came from, do not know where they came from, and where they are to, they are not recognized as citizens, or where do they belong to. And that was one of the motivation, one of the statement that Abu Dujana made in his recording to the family when he, prior to the suicide act that he committed in Mali. He called on his ethnic group to take up arms against the state, precisely because the feeling of belonging to Ghana is not there. So I agree with that, and that's a challenge. The way we can deal with that one is at the policy level, and also especially instances where this kind of issues come up have to do with when people are coming closer to, more like coming to access opportunity or whatever the state is providing. So what do we do when it comes to voter registration? What do we do when it comes to national ID card registration? What do we do when it comes to installing community chiefs in the areas? We saw some groups are Ghanaian, they deserve to have chiefs in certain areas, but some groups are not Ghanaian, so they don't deserve to have chiefs. But then we have to relate with them, they have to have leadership. So how do we do with that? So those are issues of policy concern. I think that the policymakers will take it up, and then we see how to improve their sense of national recognition. Other than that, the threat is huge, as the person said earlier.
Okay,
I don't know
thank you
whether I've
very
answered the
much. So
question.
the sense of identity is paramount. Okay, let's go around, pick 3 questions at a time, and then we'll come to some of the ones in the chat as well. So I see Martin, I see your hand up. I see Hammond, your hand up, and then I also see Albert, your hand up as well. Can you please be snappy so that Sulley can address them? And then there's quite a couple more also that we've got to answer. There's a lot of interest in this topic, so as you can see. So yes, Martin, please.
All right, thank you very much, too. Thank you, Sulley. I think you did a good work with your framework, but I would like to shift your attention a little bit to the management side of things. I want to find out, I mean, just from your reading and what you've done so far, what are the, how are the resilience factors, related? And also, if you could point out maybe 2 or 3 factors that are significant in terms of the resilience, because this would also inform in the sort of action, whether military or non-military, and how from a more strategic management perspective, we can process that. So if you can touch also on that, I'll be very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Can we have Hammond? So Martin asked about resilience factors.
Yes. All right. Thank you very much. I think, Ibrahim, you did wonderfully well with your presentation. So briefly, I was in Niger, the Republic of Niger, which shares borders with some of these countries. And as part of my study, one thing I realized was the aspect of climate change and its impact on how the youth are able to embrace other ideologies and foreign influence. So I earlier on posed a question. I think you tried to address that. Probably in future, you could also look at a quick study relating to how climate change, water scarcity, and other factors are also driving young people into accepting some of the ideologies that comes with joining terror groups. So if you look at Ghana, specifically in the north, Upper West, Upper East, and Tamale, we have a lot of young boys and girls coming down south, and when they come as Kaya, the only reason we are assigned to is that because of economic reasons, but it goes beyond that, because if they can't go to farm, if the maize they are not having harvest for maize and yam and other things, then they are being forced to come. And for most of these people, any ideology that can give them rice, oil, and food in the next 2-3 days will influence them. So many people speak about this, and I'm sure you came across that in your literature. So it will be an added advantage in a sort of paper or another study that will carefully look at that. And I think your study gives the basis for everything. It will just be a top up to that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hammond. Yes, say rice, oil, and food reminds me of the saying that a hungry man is an angry man. And if you cannot meet those needs, then yes, a problem. Albert, can you please ask a question as well? Then.
Okay, thank you so much, Theo. Thank you so much, Sulley. That was a brilliant delivery. Permit me to ask, and in case my question falls off, we are in the sciences, so we do more with quantitative research. This is a qualitative research, right?
Yes.
I would like to find out, be that qualitative that it may be, or it may look, is it the possibility, or is there a possibility of running some maybe additional quantitative sort of analysis that could group which factors are solely associated with the motive, or the zeal to engage in terrorism? Now, when you do that, you'll be able to see which ones are key and which ones are playing a minor role. I don't know if you like to take up something like that, and I don't know, also probably in your reading, you came across some sort of research that also looked at that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much, Albert. So Sulley, over to you. You've got first question for Martin on resilience factors. I suppose that dovetails into Hammond's question about the climate and water scarcity issues. And then the last one on would you consider running some additional quantitative analysis? Over.
Thank you. And thank you, Martin, because if you look at the resilient factors, you're looking about opportunity and plus motivation plus capacity. In the first place, where you stand from is to ask whether there is opportunity for that. And those opportunities will come in a form like state repression, sense of injustice, and perception of exclusion. So if the opportunity to do is so strong, then it's likely to motivate people to act. And even in instances where they don't have the capacity, they may try in order to draw attention. So those are the fundamentals starting from, for me, in the analysis and the observation is the opportunity to do it. If the opportunity is strong, the motivation is likely to come. And where the two meet, the capacity may be there or not there, but the possibility that those who want to try because they will feel strongly that they have to do something against this kind of treatment meted out to them. So the relationship is from there. So the first starting point is the opportunity. So you have that kind of interaction among those two elements. But in terms of the three significant factors that we can build more resilience, as I said earlier, in terms of the state treatment of identity-based grievances, if the state itself is complicit in this kind of problems, then in the first place, you're courting attention of certain individuals belonging to certain groups or identify with certain ideologies to migrate from the subnational level to the state level. And that engagement is likely to cause a lot of wrangle. So the first thing is that one. And the second one is at the community level, do people have that kind of interaction? For example, Ghana, for example, if you use Ghana, you have a lot of those kind of opportunities. Like I said earlier, a chief having a cultural festival, and all those are participating, they are Muslims and Christians, or their other identity, even other different religious, ethnic backgrounds or regional backgrounds are all part of that participation. So how then do you then participate in someone's culture and then turn around and look at that person as less a human being, and for that matter, you have to be eliminated? So that community resilience, somehow we don't look at it, but it is helping us to sustain some of these differences. So we look at the state and you look at the community level, the resilience level there, but then the frictions will definitely count. As long as human beings interact, there will be frictions. And how you manage the friction will then come to the state itself. So the state delivery in addressing these grievances, like I said, in terms of the laws, in terms of your counter-terrorism strategy that you're applying, if it's not really enforcing the resilience, but rather dividing it, then you are going to have a problem. And that's where the difficulty is I see in Ghana, as whether to apply the law that says, oh, okay, if a person commits terrorism outside of the country and he's a citizen of Ghana, he has to be tried by the High Court. But we have had 2 cases where people have involved themselves in those terrorism outside of the country. We have not heard or seen any document that says the state has planned or has prosecuted or has investigated and realized that their cases are not prosecutable. So that's the difficulty. And the difficulty why the state is not doing it. So, okay, if we do it, will it trigger more attention or not trigger more attention? I think that's my perception. But because I've not done interview to that extent, I cannot say it's valid. And if I come to Hammond case in terms of climate change, that's a great fact. And people have mentioned in terms of its impact on herders and Fulani conflicts or farmers and herders conflicts in the sub-region. And Ghana is not exception. It's not just about herders and farmers conflict, even farmers themselves. Sometime last year, I was somewhere in the Upper East region observing some of the dams and how they use it. If we put it down, sometimes we think, okay, they are using for only one crop. Even within that farming, there is a lot of differences that are marked out. Some crops are farmed by women, some crops are farmed at a particular point, and when those crops are going out, another ones are coming. So they will continue, they will harvest the main crops with the main season and start the dam farming somewhere, let's say December through to somewhere April. If you're able to work on that, we're able to hold back certain movement, fair enough. But if you're not able to do, and sometimes there are a lot of water spill over that coming and destroy other people's crops. You interact with people and I say, I grew up here, every day water sweeps my father's crops away. Do you expect me to stay here and continue to do the same thing that is every day is being cleared out? So that's a problem. So it's not just, it's a national problem, it's a sub-regional problem, and it's also an individual problem. How do we deal with that? And that will come from the policymakers in terms of what can we do to ensure that some of the generational challenges are not shifted across to other generations. So that's a problem. If the border towns area or even the marginalized community groups, and you look at especially the cases of the second generation, where they don't know where their parents came from, And where they are today, they are not recognized as such. And they don't feel recognized, and that's a problem. So it's not just even about the climate itself pushing them away, but their sense of inclusion in that area and have access to the land to farm, which they don't even have in the first place. And then the citizenship rights, so sometimes ties people to a certain homeland, and they don't have. That's a big problem. And if I come to
can you sort of, yeah, there's there's still a lot more questions, so
okay,
if you can be quite snappy with the responses.
Okay, in terms of Albert one, I think that would be, if I'm able to do a survey on that, and that's going to be a big problem, because you would need to identify individuals who have engaged themselves in this kind of acts in order to survey them to find out what their motivations are. Or you have to presume that certain communities are prone to it, and for that matter, you are going to do a survey on them. And that's also the tricky area. One may not be able to involve himself so much, because not many people want to associate with it. Because if you talk about terrorism or terrorist groups, we tend to have not want to have anything to do with them, and we are approaching individuals in that category. There's always that problem that they may not want to participate. But I think it's a great suggestion in terms of a survey. I would think around them, and also in terms of the climate question as a big picture or a big risk or another paper somewhere. Thank you, Tia. Yes.
All right. Thank you for those brilliant responses. There were some questions that were typed here, but the people are actually on the platform. So let me just get them to ask them, and then we'll come back for another round of questions. So Gifty, if you're available and you can ask your question. I also see Eva, you had a question. If you can follow that up, and then we take the question also from Felix Amomensa. So Gifty, over to you.
Hello, Doc, and good afternoon, everyone.
Please,
can you hear me?
Yes, good afternoon, Gifty, and thank you.
So first of all, thank you for the wonderful presentation. So I think somewhere along the presentation, you spoke about the fact that the chances of a terrorism eruption domestically in Ghana is slim. And I have done a bit of reading about how terrorism started in neighboring countries like Nigeria and the rest. And I would want to know, this may not necessarily be as is happening in other countries, but if you would look at how in recent times, there have been a lot of incidents of daylight robberies, car raids, even in thick vehicular traffic when other cars are around and all of that, considering the issues of the horizontal inequalities that keep increasing, the fact that the young people think they are being marginalized, think they are not being given the opportunities to attain enough wealth as people in political power are attaining. Don't you think these are indicators of a possible terrorism rise in Ghana in the next few years? Now, let me just attach my second question. So recently there was an issue with secessionism. There was a group somewhere in the Volta region that was talking about establishing their own country, and eventually was discovered that they were undergoing some kind of military training. They had their own tools and all of that. If people can have arms like this, how do we describe the current state of arms regulation and control in the country? And can't these things also lead to the formation of terrorist groups? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so Eva, Eva, yes, if you can ask your question as well. And so in the meantime, if you can maybe stop your share so we see whoever is on the platform.
Okay, great.
So I've typed my question. So I was wondering if you've considered just violent practice and coercion as recruitment. For example, some terrorists, they recruit by just saying to the locals, you join or I kill you. You also have a lot of children being abducted that make up for significant numbers of fighters. I'm taking the example of Mozambique in this case. But it's certainly also the case in Sahel. So I was wondering how you would assess the state's capacity to counter that. And also the second factor would be opportunism. So same thing also works for Mozambique and Sahel, which means that some people are just willing to join because it would give them some sort of way to climb the social ladder and exert power over other people in the village where maybe they were, in another position before. or they just go on the side of the stronger man in town to protect themselves. So this type of opportunism and bear violence and coercion, do you think that this could be well enough for a group to pick up in Ghana, given that I guess that the security forces cannot be present in each and every place in order to prevent them from happening?
Okay, thanks so much, Eva.
Okay.
Can I go ahead and answer this? Or we have
Okay, so let's get the responses to the first two questions. Starting with Gifty's one about, how do you separate some of the things about, is it everyday criminality, somebody stealing your phone or car snatching, and how does that dovetail into things like terrorism? And then Eva's question a bit more about, explaining the opportunities and the motivation a lot more. And I think there was another question from Eva again, sorry, from Gifty, on the rise of these domestic secessionist groups like the Western Togoland Foundation, and would we classify that as terrorism?
Okay, thanks so much. Let me just project my screen a little bit for Gifty and everyone here since a minute. At this, okay. Okay, this particular slide in response to Gifty's first question in terms of what are the opportunities, because those incidents are happening. Because I said, yes, we are resilient. The chances of groups emergence are quite slim, but then there are other factors that can trigger other forms of terrorism. The non-domestic group is difficult for them to emerge, but that does not apply to cross-border attacks or diffuse violence in the sense that someone acting terrorism in Ghana in reference or in solidarity with a terrorist group that exists outside of the country because of those issues that you rightly mentioned in terms of horizontal inequalities, in terms of feeling that the state is repressive towards it, or the state is not responding.
I think we're struggling to hear you a little bit. Your video just went off, Sulley.
Yeah, we couldn't hear anything.
So, Sulley, perhaps if you just maybe turn off your video.
Those two forms of terrorism. But when it comes to a group emerging,
yeah, I think Sulley would rejoin. His network is just giving him up. We just wait for him to rejoin. We have another 15 minutes for the Q&A. Anyway, but yes, these were quite important questions that have been asked by the members. I think perhaps while we wait for Sulley to rejoin, if anybody has a contribution to the existing questions we've discussed, then that would be great. In the absence of Sulley rejoining the conversation.
the internet just blacked. Let's see. Okay. So
are you back?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay. Yeah. So if you can turn off your video, maybe that will help conserve the bandwidth. And please be snappy. Yeah, Sulley, please on your mic and then just be snappy.
It says, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Hello?
We can hear you now. The internet seems to have given you up a bit, but we can hear you.
Hello?
Can you all hear Sulley?
Okay. So I was basically saying that the chances that it's really terrible. I don't know what's the problem today, but is it now?
It's good now.
Now?
Yes, please continue. You can also turn off your video and stop the screen share.
Okay, I think that would be perfect. Yes, and I turn off the video. Okay, so I was saying that there are several factors in terms of Ghana being resilient against domestic groups are quite there. But in terms of our weakness to attract violence, diffuse violence, let's say act committed here in reference of another group outside is quite high. And also in terms of cross-border attacks, it's quite also threatened. And that's why we go to our counter-terrorism measures to deal with. But in terms of whether the separatism problem in the eastward region can trigger, or if that one exists, then how can we say it's not terrorist groups emerging in Ghana is quite weak? Yes, we know they have been existent, but the response of the state to it have not gotten to a point that we can say, okay, it's escalating it. Like the state is engaged in confrontation with that particular group for sustained number of days or weeks in trying to control it. Anytime they have shown their heads, the state has acted. So meaning the state is resilient in dealing with them, but maybe how we move the state towards to prevent them from showing up in the first place, that's where we might have a problem. But in terms of other crime, terrorism is a different categories of crime. All societies have cases of armed robberies and everything, but I don't think cases of armed robbery increases necessarily say that, okay, terrorism also increased. That's an issue that I think we can debate always. Yeah, hello? Is that okay?
Yes, we can hear you. That was yes. Can you address quickly the two other?
So I go to
the other question that was asked, because there's a lot more, and we need to wrap up by the next 10, 12 minutes.
Yeah, in terms of individuals wanted to join the groups or being abducted, also tells you the capacity of the state in that area. Because our security is supposed to be provided by the state. But if the state is weak there and private individuals have taken be able to institute themselves as security providers, and state cannot even pounce on them, and individuals have to ride on them for their security, then we say it's the weakness of the state and not the individuals who are there, who are mightier, who more or less have, you can say, okay, they are the ones who are there. So if the state is so effective there, individuals emerging and taking the responsibility of state in providing security will not be in exist. And those who will try will not be successful, because the individuals will know that they cannot rely on another individual for security unless the state. So those are I don't know whether that will be clear there. And there's the issue of the strongman and the issue of the capacity of I think, is that okay within the Evers context?
Yeah, I was wondering, how would you assess Ghana's capacity in that regard?
Yes, if you look at Ghana in terms of particular individuals emerging in Ghana and appropriating the provision of security for themselves and asking other community members to pledge allegiance to them in return for their security, I would say it's quite weak, because the state has been effective. If you look at a little, there's how will this work? You won't find the presence of the state across the entirety of the national borders. And if the state is there and provides security through the police, through the political actors like assemblymen and all those, the district assemblies and all those that are distributed around the country, how then do they sit down and watch for an individual to emerge and then appropriate the provision of public security, and then individuals owe allegiance to that person in return for their protection, and the state to be, those actors to be existing operating. So for me, I would say at least for the time being, Ghana will be is more resilient against that kind of phenomena.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you very much. We have a few more that I want to take, but I see, PK, you say you have a small contribution you want to make, so we'll give you 2 minutes to do that. Then I'll come to ask the other questions. So I see Dennis, your hand up. I see Joachim, your hand up. I see Isaac Ajiri, and then I see Edwin as well. And we'll take those 4 questions, and time permitting, we'll come and take 2 more that have already been asked as well. So quickly, can we have your contribution, PK?
Hello, please, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Pakwisi Woslipra, and during his presentation, I saw the slide, he quoted my article in his slides here. Okay. And yes, I wanted to make a very simple contribution. During your presentation, you mentioned about the border towns playing a crucial role, or they not being marginalized. I think I heard something of that sort, and it's very important. During my research, I interviewed security personnel from the Ghana Immigration Service. And please, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, go on.
Yes, and they said one of the reasons why Ghana has not faced issues of terrorism is because of these border towns. People in these communities serve as watchdogs for the country, informal watchdogs, and they report to security agencies anytime someone suspicious enters the country. So when you said it, I was very happy, because this is one of the key people. People in these towns are very key to the survival of our country against terrorism. So it's a very important point you really made. Thank you very much.
I'm so grateful, and thanks so much. I benefit a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes. All right, brilliant. Thank you for that contribution, Pakwisi. Can we take Edwin? You have 1 minute to ask your question. Same for Isaac, and then I also saw, I think, Dennis's hand up.
Hello, Doc. Can I proceed?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Sulley. I think that was a very insightful presentation. But I just want to ask 2 things. Sectorally, perhaps maybe we are not seeing direct actions of citizens that suggest maybe some incidents of terrorism or seeds of terrorism. But as part of your reading, did you consider maybe some sectoral issues like land conflict in some parts of the country where foreign groups like, let's say, Fulani headsmen claiming legitimacy over land, that over the years has led to enormous killing in those communities, and they've formed more like gangs protecting their territories. Then again, if you look at in terms of cross-border trade, where some Ghana, there's been transit of some improvised explosive devices and some, let me say, items that are used by terrorist groups. Would that maybe, as part of your definition, be an indicator to suggest the tendency of terrorism either setting up or, let me say, growing in that country, or such incidences within specific sectors such as trade, agri, and maybe other sectors that items that are traded predisposes the country to terrorist attacks or the growth of terrorism? Would that also be considered as indicators of threat of terrorism in the country? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, quickly, Edwin, can we get your question? And then after we take Isaac.
Definitely, Dr. Theo, thanks very much. And thanks so much for putting this together, and to Sulley for the brilliant presentation on trying to show us the nexus between 3 different related factors that explains the incident or not of terrorism. I think what I want to say is I really like how you put together the issues around opportunity, the motives, and then also the capacity. There's been a lot of research in this field. You may already know Paul Kulia and Professor Hoffler, who have espoused some theories around greed and grievances, which explains exactly the opportunity and motives that you've touched on. So I think those were very brilliant, that you also added the aspect of capacity. So on that aspect, and also particularly around resilience, I'm keen to hear your thoughts and through your research, whether you did find, any sort of evidence around embedded proactive peace building that is practiced within Ghana, within our institutions at the state level, within the society level, within the individual level, how we interact as a society, all these sort of cushioning factors that are able to help us in one way or the other build peace indirectly, and that also sort of limits the propensity of conflict or terrorism acts, which might not be very present in other countries, where the opportunities might be there, where the motives might be there, and where the capacities might be there. I'll be very happy if you can touch on that. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Shall we take Isaac, your question, please?
Thank you, Theo and Sulley. Just a quick one. I want to find out from Sulley if in his work he came across anything between any relationship between the political instability and the struggle for political power, and then terrorism in the sub-region. Do we find politically induced terrorism in the sub-region? And then my second question is related to the first, which is the spatial effects that all of this political instability that we witness in our neighboring countries. Do we see any risk or threats from that, causing terrorism to get a foothold in Ghana?
Okay, so just to summarize, 3 quick questions for you, Sulley. Dennis wants to find out about the relationship between the land conflict and some of these groups, and you can even add in chieftaincy as well into the equation and how that could potentially drive terrorism. Isaac wants to know about the relationship between political instability and some of the conflicts that we're seeing in our regional, neighbors, Mali, Guinea, recently Burkina Faso. And then Edwin also asked a question kind of related to Dennis's, do you have any evidence of some of the ongoing or active peace building efforts by the state having sort of a moderating effect on reducing the potential incidence of terrorism? Thank you.
Thanks so much, and then thank you for the contributors, and thank you once more to PK. His article was a lot of opening. And then coming to Derek, in terms of, I mentioned those issues have at the border, let's say the marginalized groups in terms of the Fulani, and then their relationship with the farming communities, because in the first place, they don't have land. So that's a problem. That's a big problem for them in terms of where they'll graze. And we have those kind of crises every now and then coming, and the state more like deploy military security agents to go after them. We have few of them around 2012, somewhere in the Ashanti region, that about coming. But we also have issues at Karaga around the northern region area where Abuja actually came from or claimed homeland or where he belongs. So those things are there, the interaction, and it's quite not healthy when they meet. But we have cases a few years back where farmers will go and burn the huts of Fulanis or even their cattle, precisely because they have allowed their cattle to graze on their farms. So those threats are there. And that's why I said our resilience is being tested by the way we deal with this kind of crisis in terms of issues about chieftaincy. I mentioned the issues of ethnic and chieftaincy violence, so much endemic in the northern region, or the northwest part of the country, which is also facing Burkina, and the possibility that, okay, what can be the implication for us? Is it going to create openings for people to learn how to master violence, and what will be the implication? So those things are there. They are threats that I think counter-terrorism wise, we need to pay attention to them. And then coming to Edens, if I can move quickly with the others, and at the societal level, we have a lot of peace building mechanisms that are holding us. I mentioned the offices of the chiefs. Or a chief he might be a Muslim or Christian, but he has a festival that he's celebrating at the same time with this kind of differences. That festival brings Muslims and Christians together, and at the same time bring all cultural people together. So at the end of the day, his office is an enabling environment for us to understand all these differences and also to appreciate that even with those differences, we can still relate to the as one people. So even though we do not, because we have in our thing, we do not necessarily pay attention to it, but it's in one way or other helping us to deal with someone or to hold our differences together. And if you look at the individual level, I talk about the interaction. Someone in the same family, you have a lot of religious differences within that family. Someone is celebrating naming ceremony, you'll be there. Marriage ceremony, you'll be there. Funeral, you'll be there. How do you sympathize with the person at this level? And then you turn around at home and look at that person and say, okay, let me accommodate bad actors who harm that person, or let me harm that person. So we have them, they are so much ingrained in our system, and we do not necessarily sometimes pay attention to them. But when in critical junctures, they come to the fore, and we begin to see their importance in our lives. And if we look at the state level, I talk about the law prohibiting the formation of political parties along ethnic, regional, or religious lines. And that's a very fantastic law. What he has done is to ensure that differences at the societal level are not brought to the state. Because when they are brought to the state and they are being debated at the state level and they are being contested at the state level, just look at only 2 political parties struggling at the state level and look at the polarization that comes to the bottom. So if those differences were to come to the state level, someone from the north, a political party, bringing those differences from the south, from this religious background, that religious background, they are meeting at state level to debate, then you can ask yourself, whose religious identity will take supreme over the other, and what will be the implication? Once those laws are there, and once the state is not involving in targeting or committing violence against certain individuals or certain groups, historically and in contemporary terms, it's also peace-building mechanism, or more or less trying to contain or help us contain those differences. And then the last one, talking about political struggle. If you look at discussion about terrorism in a country, I mentioned in the literature, the first point I mentioned was bad political leadership and governance. Because what bad leadership does is, because it's not able to govern well, it uses repression. And if you use repression, you are more or less trying to push people to react. And they will not react individually, they are going to form groups, and those groups are likely to be formed along certain identity lines. So you have community self-help brigades. And when they become so effective, and then you see other individuals claiming ownership of them and they franchising them out or using them to commit violence elsewhere. So instances where the state itself has been weak. If you look at the Mali crisis today, it didn't just start on a go as a religious matter. It started as a political matter. The Tuareg rebels found the opportunity to use the weapons that were coming from Libya to speed their struggle for independence. And the state responded, but very weakly. So that initiated the junior officers to embark on a coup because they felt they have been humiliated, and as a result of the political leadership. And in the process, the country became weak, and then terrorist groups took over the whole environment. And now we see what is going on in that country. So we can't rule political struggle out of the kind of terrorism that we find in West Africa. That's why I say terrorism in West Africa is more or less context dependent, more or less nationally ingrained. So you cannot analyze it wholly out of the country in which it is operating. So I think briefly, that's what I can say on these 3 questions. If it's okay, it's clear.
Okay, thank you all very much. We've run 3 minutes past our scheduled time. I think you would all join me in thanking Sulley for kicking off our first session. It's been brilliant. We have learned a lot. I believe you have as well. We would, of course, share the video through our formal channels, and those who want to catch up or did not have the time to listen or join in from the very beginning would have an opportunity to do so. But Sulley, thank you so much for availing yourself to share with us those fantastic insights on terrorism. And I live with with 3 things: on the opportunity and the motive and the capacity. And I'm gonna do a little bit more research around that myself as we get along. But thank you, every one of you, for making the time. A few house rules for 1 minute just to remind us. If you have any of your research or ideas that you want to share at the next webinar, please use the link that I have on the screen here, bit.ly/GRN monthly, and you can fill in that form and then tell us what you want to, to share, and certainly we'll make an opportunity for you to present to the House. If we get a lot more interest, then perhaps we actually will move this webinar and make it every fortnight. So every 2 weeks, we'll be having a webinar instead of monthly, but it depends on what we get in terms of ideas to present for the next month and coming. So in February and March, we're looking at having some coaching sessions and mentoring session for some of the young up and coming researchers. And then we'll also have a session on research methods, and how to go about some of the literature reviews or surveys as well. So these are the few House reminders that I have for us. And I would want to thank each and every one of you for making the time to join us this afternoon. Those that have expressed interest in helping us do the admin work, I would reach out to you separately. But Sulley, thank you as always. It's been fantastic having you. Thank you to the members for also joining, and we look forward to seeing you at the next session. Thank you all very much.
And thank you all. And anyone feel free can share with my email any question or concern. We can still take the discussion forward. I'm so grateful and thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody.
To the recording. Can you go be off?